Okay, so so the thing that I wanted to do is first introduce the idea of intention setting, right? So kind of have been going over the group intention, right? So as a group, we want to bring in things that we either personally found moving or we struggle with, right? And then we bring it up for discussion. And then I also want to have an element for personal intention. And the personal intention is something that is supposed to facilitate your growth, right? Like it's supposed to facilitate your interaction with what's currently happening, and also like it's trying to highlight what you're trying to get out of the text, right? And so I want to state what intentions are not. So intentions are not promises, right? So we're not holding ourselves to standards, or like we're not making requests of ourselves or others. Like an intention is not a requirement, right? So it's not a thing that you have to do. It's a thing that will guide you in your participation. And your intention is also not a goal, right? Intentions are ways of interacting, right? And you don't know what type of expression they will find, and that's also part of their purpose, right? Because they open up a different type of participation. So the way in which I wanted each of us to set our intention and also have ourselves introduce ourselves a little bit is um, state why we're here, right? And like when we're stating why we're here, then that also implies what you want to get out of it, right? So you can articulate that as an intention for yourself in your current participation, right? And then that also introduces um, each other. So I'll start this off, and then we'll just go around. Um, I'll call the next person by name. So I'm here partially because I still need to catch up on Plato. I've engaged a lot with Plato, but I don't think I actually read it. So that is a thing. And the other thing is like I've been trying to facilitate these things and trying to figure out what it means to facilitate it. So this is an opportunity for me to learn about how people participate, how I can facilitate that participation, and how that fits into the framework that I use to understand these things. And so that's also my intention going to be, right? Like it's like I'm gonna attend to the way that people are participating, and I'm trying to lift up that participation in the best way possible. Adam, where are you?
Well, I've had a bit of interaction with ancient Greek philosophy, but never in my life read the Republic, and so I think this is probably now is as good a time as any to familiarize myself with that part of Plato, and yeah, and then just to sort of see what other sort of people think about it, how other people relate to it, and how I can relate to that and the text, and see what I can get out of what I might be able to see from all of that in my own life.
No, you
So yeah.
point at someone else.
Oh, Mark.
Thank you, Adam. Uh, yeah, so my intent with this is I don't think I've ever read The Republic, and I find the book clubs, especially the ones that you and I participate in, Manuel, to be a very rich way to slow down and interact with the text in a way that I cannot alone, right? Because I have a single perspective, and being with other people and hearing their perspectives on the same words in many cases, even if it's a different translation, right, for the same spirit of the text, and being able to interact with that live with a real person is for me much richer than merely interacting with the text by myself. And I get a deeper, more full sense, especially because I am slowing down and reading the book at a pace, which also helps to absorb the book instead of trying to like power through it or whatever. And So that's my intent, is to have that deep, rich, multi-perspective, distributed cognition sort of experience with a book, rather than merely reading it. With that, I will hand it over to Danny.
Excuse me. So I'm here initiating this because I started listening to this audiobook in the sauna, and I found it to be engaging, cool. I was totally captivated by the drama of it. It felt like I was listening like a master perform. And I got a feeling that there's a bunch of cool stuff that I was only able to see like 5% of. And then also, I was hoping to kind of connect real life with you guys because I'm too exhausted in my day to day life to participate as much as I'd like to. So we'll see how that goes. But I was also kind of hoping to create some new connections as well. And so, but yeah, I'm definitely here to kind of just learn from the book. I listened to the whole thing through, and I listened to chapter 1 several times. So I posted a summary of this morning that I just wrote up real quick. That's just the facts. But the facts, like I mentioned, I'm glad Beatrix brought up the translation thing, because I think for me it does matter, because for me the actual emotiveness of the words is everything, and just knowing like all the arguments about justice and stuff, I'm less attracted to. But there's plenty of awesome themes I'm looking forward to exploring in chapter 1. So let's see, Sally.
Well, hold on.
Oh, yep.
What is your intention? That
Oh, my intention. I'm sorry. So my intention is to perform an experiment to see what happens with the digital physical thing. But then also, so I'm seeking what's already emerged in the last hour, which is when I say that I feel like there's only 5% of stuff that I'm getting. A lot of it is there's frames that I don't know, and you can apply different frames to solve different problems, right? And so as a group, you're able to learn your blind spots, and you're able to see your own motivations a little bit more clearly when you can bounce it off other people. So I've already gotten that, but that's what one of the things I was seeking in the form of participation here. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's satisfactory for you, then
Okay.
it's good enough.
Okay, Sally?
I've listened to Plato's Republic before on audiobook. I enjoy looking at these type of topics between multiple different parties, because that helps me understand what I'm there, and my intention is to get cartoon ideas.
I think we can go to Whack. If that's your real name.
Yes. So I'm Wissam. I enjoy philosophy in general, but I don't read it as much as I think must do. My brother have read already this book, and he told me good thing about it. So I was interested in it. I know Platon ideas in general, but it's very interesting for me to go in depth in this bigger book, the biggest book you have, the Republic. I did one book club when I was in Houston. I really enjoyed the process. So my intention is to go through the books, learning the different perspective of people, and having a way to set up what I need to understand about Plato and the Republic.
Ethan?
Hey, well, it's hard for me to answer the intention, because I just barely found out about this book club. But I've actually the idea of a book club for the Republic has been something I've been kind of fantasizing about for probably a year now. It's just kind of odd. I just found out about it yesterday, despite personally sending Mark a copy of the Republic. the Republic. I purchased it when I was listening to a lecture by Arthur Holmes. It's just like it was on philosophy, ancient philosophy, and he says kept telling his students to go purchase the Republic and read it. He said, "You're not educated until you read the Republic." He said it's probably one of the most fundamental texts of Western culture, save the Bible. And after reading it, I understand why he said that, because if you were, I mean, it was like the book you read. Like when you went to the academy, you would be educated in classics, and that's classic, right? You know what? There is one thing that was really helpful for me. There's somebody did a dramatic representation. They have different people speaking and stuff. That was really good. I would read it and then listen to it on that. There's obviously it's been around for so long, so it's very rich and has a lot of depth to it. But even just surface level stuff, you can get a lot. Just from surface level things like, you know, the problems with democracy, you know, what it means to live a good life, kind of. Honestly, a little bit skeptical, especially with the limited amount that I've engaged with Eastern Orthodoxy, and actually you guys, learning that interpretation is very important and vital, obviously, because things can be interpreted incorrectly. Very easy, I guess. Apparently, it's very easy to fall into a Gnostic reading of Plato. Something that has really much helped me is D.C. Schindler, which definitely is, I would say, is a very Christian reading of the Republic, despite not using the word Christ once at all in his entire book. So there's lots to learn. I'm very excited to the amount that I can participate with you guys. So my intention, I guess, is to capture insight to capture good insight, which I'm a little anxious about, but I will be optimistic.
Okay.
I think of most people that are willing to do a book club on the internet, I think this is probably a good little batch. So
I
sorry for
can
being so long.
confirm. Can confirm. So yeah, then I wanted to remind everybody of this idea of a container, right? So we're all participating in something that contains the spirit of the conversation, and that requires us to have a certain type of participation, right? So one of the things that you want to do is you want to try to abstain from contribution when it's not furthering the spirit of the conversation, right? So we're here to have the spirit and have it flow, and if we're obstructing it, right, like if we're having a skeptical, like it's not bad to be skeptical, but like if everything flows through a skeptical perspective, then it's everything what we do gets obstructed, right? So we want to construct something, we want to find the things that are there for us to be found instead of shoot down the things that we don't like, because I don't think that will be generative. And there's also a bunch of symbolism in the text, right? Like there's hidden meaning, like we talked about it, right? Like only 5% that Danny has seen, right? So part of the thing that we want to do is we want to lift these things up into the light so that we can play with it, we can bounce it around, and we can add to it, right? It's like we don't have to be strictly bound to the text, we can add to that as well. And yeah, so these symbols, right? Like they have a relationship between each other, right? Like that flows out of the text, but they also have a relationship to us, right? And that's ultimately why we're doing this, right? Like we're trying to implement these things in our lives, and so making these connections and making things relevant to our personal situation is a thing that I invite people to do. And then we can, by example, make things relevant to the other people in the group. And yeah, lastly, staying silent is also a contribution. Right? Like if you don't have something valid to add, it's okay just not to participate in whatever's going on in the moment. That is completely fine, and there's no shame there.
I have a question. Yes, how much time does the book club, does the session stay? 2 hours, 3 hours? 1 hour?
We have not set a time, so any?
Okay.
Yeah, it's open ended, so you can feel free to come and go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will need to go in 1.5 hours, just to let you know.
Yeah, we'll manage. I think. I think we'll be exhausted at that point as well. Yeah. So Danny, do you want to? You said you had a summary. So like maybe there's someone who wants to say some introductory things, or Danny wants to get us going from the start of the summary.
So you want a breath first, or you want to walk through it a little bit slower? Like, you want me to zoom through the whole chapter? Just at a
No,
or,
I want people to I want to cohere to the structure of the story, and when things
okay.
are relevant to people, we want to talk about it.
So okay, first Socrates runs into this guy named Cephalus, some old rich guy, and he makes some comments about how passions, specifically sexual passions, recede in old age, and that frees him up to have a calmness and a sense of freedom. They talk about wealth. I can't remember from memory because it's not on my notes, but I don't recall if this is a chapter or even the book where Socrates talks about how companionship is like a higher virtue than like the pursuit of money. I don't remember if those comments are made in the chapter, but Cephalus says that one of the advantages of having wealth in an older age is that he does feels the need to not have to deceive other men. And he also talks about how later in life there's the fear of punishment in afterlife. It was a laughing matter when he was younger, and now it's more serious. Then the conversation after those are kind of neither here nor there. That was kind of just character building. It seemed like character building from what I could tell.
Well, let me jump in here real quick. So I want to make one quick note because I think it's actually super important, right? This whole thing starts with a religious ritual, right? So there's a religious ritual that starts the whole thing off, right? And so we're ending the religious ritual, and then we're walking down the road, and then we get stopped, and then there's an interaction that I found very interesting, and Adam was talking about this with us yesterday, right? Where it's like, Socrates, you're gonna come with us, and Socrates is sort of, no, please help, I feel oppressed. Like literally, it's really funny. It's actually quite an amusing interaction, and he gets, as a result of that, he gets cajoled or drawn in, or however you want to frame it, and it's almost cheeky in the book, right? It's campy, right? And the whole idea behind this is that you're going from that more serious religious frame into this sort of jesting, relaxed, what do you call it, communal mode, right? Where it's like, come be in our community, right? And you notice he is treating it as an imposition. Now, I haven't read ahead that far, so I have a feeling this is going to come up later when they talk about community. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure, right? So that contrast between the very serious religious thing that it starts with, and I did ask his YouTube channel is Lantern Jack, my buddy Jack, about this. I all of the philosophical texts seem to mention and possibly start with a religious reference. I don't think that's a coincidence from the Greeks. I think they're saying something very important about the relationship between their religious ceremonies, whatever random paganism they happen to subscribe to, for whoever, whichever philosopher is telling the story, and the philosophy. They all seem to be grounded in that religious tradition. And then when you get to the point of the old men talking, that is the contrast. So you have the past being venerated in the religious tradition, right? That's just implied and sort of glossed over because it's taken for granted because it's probably part of everyday life for these folks, right? Because
Well,
maybe not every day.
I want to comment on that because I don't think so, right? Because what he's doing, he's descending from the city with his body, right? Like his body is, I think, representative of the upper class, more heady type, right? So they're the two of them descending. I think it's into the harbor, right? And it's the
Piraeus.
Thracians in the harbor that are doing this sacrificing towards the god, right? And he's specifically interested in how they're executing their ritual, right? So in some sense, he's coming down away from his high place to observe common man, and then he gets caught by the common man, but also it's not, it's alien, right? So it's not Athens that is represented, it's the Thracians that do religious ritual, right? So that's also an importing of the outside into the community.
Can I just say on the comment on the Piraeus, it's very strange if you look at the ancient construction, because Piraeus is contiguous with Athens. You see, if you look at old ancient port cities, there's generally a sort of green space in between, so the walls of the city will stop. But as distinct with Athens, you will see in ancient depictions, you have the city around the Acropolis, and there is a wall. There is a curtain wall on either side all the way down to the Piraeus. And so it's all, if you want to think about it, it's all contained within Athens. Piraeus is kind of, if you want, kind of like the porch, another porch of Athens. It's a porch onto the water rather than porch onto the rest of Greece.
Well, there's that sense of integration too, of this integration of the highest and the lowest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't focus so much on the religious perspective, but how I thought about it is I asked myself the question why he speak first with this old man, and for me the old man is I agree with most of what he say, and I think he represents Stoicism in general, because he has an age where he have no more desire, and so he's more in a phase with Stoicism. And it's like Socrates found his good old friend that is Stoic, and that's the beginning of his like big book. That's how I perceive it, because it doesn't add much at the book. I mean, at the perspective, he's speak on a different subject. It's not directly justice, and that's how I felt about the beginning of the book. It's the we start with Stoicism and this mindset in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. That timeline, right? And then they're establishing in that conversation wisdom, right? They're establishing this wisdom gained through experience, which I think is really important, or going to be really important to the story, further on. And it's from that where the oldest sort of hands it off, right? And then it gets handed down again. But I don't want to get too far ahead of Danny's outline here.
Yeah, but I think the old guy was also the one who extended the invitation to Socrates, right? So he's also fulfilling the role of the divine feminine in some sense. He's creating the space in which Socrates can manifest his education, because without him granting that flowering or that field in which to be flowered, Socrates would not have had that opportunity to engage in this mission.
I'm not sure if Cephal. Well, maybe it doesn't matter, but the context to add what you guys are saying, it's actually vitally important. Socrates was offering to a god, I believe it was a hunting god, a goddess of hunting. So that's very important because that's what he's embodying, because he's going to be hunting truth. He's leaving the service or celebration, whatever it is, and he's caught by these guys, and they kind of forcibly make him come back to their house. And we could say, oh, Socrates, he would have done that anyways. That's something he wanted to do. But you have to read it. You have to appreciate that there's a element of drama to this, and Socrates is playing the role of a philosopher. And the philosopher, as we read on, we'll see that a good king or a good ruler has to be compelled to rule. He can't want to rule on his own volition because it's a good indication that he's just seeking power. He has to rule out of an obligation to a higher virtue. Also, the fact that the light, it's the end of the day, I believe, and it's getting dark. So the party that they're inviting him to is going to take place after the sun has set. He mentions that with the torches and the horse races and stuff like that. So that's important stuff. That's the dramatic context of the scene here.
And the goddess, it's a hunting goddess, but it's also, it's in my footnote here, and I checked it in Wikipedia. It's a hunting goddess, but it's a Thracian goddess, so it's a foreign.
Yes,
it's a foreign goddess.
God. It's a new god that they're a little unfamiliar with. So I don't know how. I mean, maybe you guys can have some insight on there, but it is a little bit of a unfamiliar goddess.
Yeah, and the Thracians are very far off. In the ancient Greek world at this time, the Thracians are far to the north in modern day Bulgaria. So if you can imagine the amount of distance that would separate those peoples, that's kind of, if you want, kind of on the very edge. That's like the edge of, if you want, in the ancient Greek sense, a kind of the edge of barbarism.
Yeah.
And Socrates is going down to the port, kind of to the porch of chaos, to kind of to interact with this goddess.
And how often are we reminded of the motif I think we get from Pajot, his brother, that how vital the strange is to come in and renew everything. So there's that, the inside coming in, the foreign coming in. It's almost like a refertilization or something. So there's that to think about too. So it's it's not just there is definitely a dramatic element to it.
Yeah, that's all great detail and pretext. So thank you everybody for all that. If we want to proceed through the narrative, after Socrates meets Cephalus, they get talking, and they introduce the first definition of justice. And he proposes it's paying debts and telling truths. And Socrates provides some examples where, like, if you give weapons to a friend and their friend is mad, it's not just to give the weapons back to your friend when he's mad, right? So he gives some examples of why that's not the case. So that's kind of the first time that the concept of justice is introduced.
So maybe we want to reframe that, right? So like the association that I got is like restoring order in some sense, right? Like the paying debt is like debt is disordering, and then you re-put things in the proper place. Do we have different associations with that?
But yeah, a debt. If you're loaning money to somebody, you're giving of your own kind of substance, and part of the restoring of order, and that is the reciprocation of that order back. I didn't really get much more than that out of it. In fact, I'm not sure where that is in the text. Does this happen after? This is after they got talk. The Socrates and the older man were talking initially, right? This is after they interact.
No, they're still talking. It's right after
Okay.
they talked about the role of wealth, and I don't.
Okay.
But I'm not clear why they set up the role of wealth. But effectively, I think that's going to end up being a literary trick, right? Or even a trick of dialectic, where what they said about wealth, which I think again is going to be important later, right, is that if you're an ordered person, then wealth is good. But if you're not an ordered person, then wealth is not good. And so I think they're doing that to exemplify this dichotomy of justice that Socrates eventually sets up and gets into in we're calling chapter 2 here, right? The interaction with Polemarchus, where basically what's happening is you can't judge the thing in and of itself. You can't say wealth has this quality or property. And in the same way, what I think they're saying in the initial characterization of justice is you can't reduce justice down to a simple equation of paying debts and telling truth.
Mm-hmm.
Did
So
you guys, in the pretext of the setting, the fact that there's this religious ceremony and the gods are changing essentially, is that saying the world's in a chaotic place, or is like that, like there's a changing guard, or like I don't know, maybe Adam might know a little bit about this. I'm wondering if there's a connection between the context that we talked about and the role of wealth, and like the idea that we said stoicism, like if that represents the stoic position, then is that perspective on wealth or this perspective on justice, what's the relationship to the circumstance that they're in? Like, is there any? I don't know.
I can add something. But how I saw this counter argument of Socrates, saying that a mad person, you don't give him back his weapon. Well, for me, it's to set up. It's like a simple counter argument that work, and it's a way to set up distinction between human and how they deal with their soul. Because afterward, there is categorization of soul and who is able to rule or not. And I think it's just an instance of this bigger argument. And so he began with that. For me, he just dribbled like a little bit. He just talked at the beginning with people and set up his bigger argument. That's how I saw it. But I didn't make a connection between the tradition and the religion at the beginning of the book with the discussion of justice. I didn't make any tradition. I think it's just a setup of where we are and who we are. That's how I see it. And maybe it's an indication of how people in Sicily at the time think how we are, because he met people and he discussed with them, and so they are they live in certain area, and so this area affect their thoughts, affect the way of living, how they will question, and I think it's just a way to set up this. But maybe they have different opinions.
So I know that they went down to the harbor, right? Because that's where you go down to the place next to the sea, and the harbor is the place where aliens come into the city, right? But it's also the place where trade happens, right? So that's where you make money. So I think that there's a connection to money there, and yeah, like the alien is the introduction of change, right? And like in language of creation, we can find that there's good change, right? Like there's change that gets integrated, and then there's change that superimposes itself upon the structure, right? So and I think you have to keep that in mind, that change is not necessarily a negative.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that they start with wealth in the land of trade, right? Or in the space of trade, I should say, right? And then that gets them right into justice, right? But it also exemplifies the difference between, say, the simplification of something like debt, right? So you've simplified justice to debt through money, and then you go, oh, but when it's a weapon, you can't apply that principle anymore. That principle fails. And that's what gets exemplified here, at least at the end of chapter 1, right? Where it's like, oh, this is a problem. Right conduct then cannot be defined as telling the truth and restoring anything we have been trusted with. It's like, oh, well, that's a problem, right? And then this is the point, it's the end of chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 2, right? Where yes, it can, Paul Marcus breaks in, at least if we believe Simonides, right? And that's where he, that's the turning point from the setup of the story into the actual back and forth discussion where the Socratic method gets, basically used, abused, and rode hard and put away wet for sure. I really enjoyed chapter 2 because of that. I just got like sucked right in. I didn't even pay attention to what I was reading anymore. It's like, wow, this is so much fun. So yeah, it sets up this journey, right? It sets you on this journey from the hill down, right, and then now you're going into the land of trade, and now you're talking about justice, because trade is all about justice, right? You need justice in order to be able to do these things like trade.
Yeah, well, they'll go into that later in the book as well,
Yes.
right? Because when they're talking about cities, right, and when you have a harbor, right, like now, the requirements of what you need to do in order to maintain justice change. Right?
But does he make a forgot, but does he say something like, well, debt must be regulated by justice, and trade between people not regulated by justice, something like this? I forgot. No.
I don't know.
He's talking
Okay, I
about.
will take a look if.
I really like the when he's discussing, should you return arms to a person not in their right mind, and then even they kind of switch it to, should you return gold to someone not in their right mind. And this is like, if you were using Christian terms, this is the application of grace, because yes, justice is a thing, but it doesn't mean just because it falls under the black and white law that it is correct. And it's really fascinating to find that argument here when you're used to seeing it from the Christian frame.
Yeah. So another thing that stood out to me is, like, I think the old guy is like laying a foundation for the conversation, because I talked with Danny a lot about the three characters, the three young guys that are representative of the more passionate nature, and then the more heartly nature, and then more mindy, witty nature, and their capacities to relate to certain aspects and not to relate to certain aspects of the argument. But the first character that is being introduced into this argument is well, yeah, the stoic old guy, right? And in some sense, he is lecturing, right? Like he is an authority, and he's not, his relationship, at least maybe I'm wrong about it, but his relationship to Socrates was also a little bit different. Like, and I don't think he really got into the investigation as much as these other guys were.
When you feel
Yeah,
it's appropriate, Manuel, I found that illustrate the man, the beast, the monster. I found that super useful. I'd like to hear that unpacked for everyone. I think people would find value in that. If that's a Greek idea, the context too. But I know Cephalus and Socrates, they refer to each other as friend. You know, like they were traveling. Hey, you should come see me. In my old age, I can't travel as well anymore. You should come see me more often. You know, so there is some intimacy between them. So, Adam, what were you saying?
I was just going to say that there is a kind of assumed it's implicit kind of that this old man Cephalus can actually offer something to Socrates, and specifically about old age. It's like, you know, in the translation I've read here, it's kind of to the point. It's like he goes straight to the question. He says something like, you know, you've reached the threshold of old age. He says, you know, is it a difficult time? You know, what is your report about it? It's kind of, you know, he just cuts straight to what he wants to know, and there's a kind of mutual, kind of a mutual, not just respect, but kind of hierarchy between them, where it's like, of course, this old man is now going to teach the younger man what you know, answer his question, essentially. And there's also a standoffishness, of course, because afterwards, Manuel, you were pointing to kind of, you know, Cephalus kind of fades out and passes it off to the younger men. He's kind of, Cephalus is kind of, you know, it was a nice distraction, but now he's kind of going to go back to his kind of normal, regular programming. Barbecue, yeah, his barbecue. He's going to enjoy his time, you know, enjoy the things that he can in old age. Yeah.
I've noticed that pattern among certain types of old people is that they get to the point, very deep points very quickly, and they're not really afraid to go very deep very quickly. Wisam, I don't remember if you ever had the opportunity to meet Mike Lowe from Houston, but he exhibited this trait, right? I don't know. Remember, he used to be the Houston Symphony Orchestra director. You know, he was. You know, did you ever meet him, Wisam?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, that's too bad, man. Amazing person. But anyway, I do notice that pattern for what it's worth, and there seems to be something about those types of people. They seem to be looking like their entire lives. There's something very different about those types of people. You know, I don't know what to make of it, but
well, and you see that here in that the two older men who are friends and have this, to your point, Danny, intimate relationship, are to some extent toying with the younger one, right? Because he's handing it off, right? He said, well, I'll bequeath the argument to you, right? Which is kind of like, go ahead, dude. You think you're going to argue with Socrates? Have at it, buddy. I'm going to go back to the barbecue because I know how this is going to go, right? There's you get that sense immediately. It's very few words in the two translations I've read. Very few words. It's very concise and right to the point. But you very much, and this is where, you know, some of the symbolism is important, right? You can say, oh, all of this, you know, the first part of this first chapter, this setup stuff is just not important to the argument. But actually, I think it's everything to the argument, because like a good play, it actually matters where things start. And that starting point and the process of handing things off and the cleverness with which it's handed off, because it does go, the two old men sort of start this discussion on something very deep and draw everybody else into that discussion effectively. And one of them's just like, you got this. I'm going to go over here and have me some food. Like, have a blast, right? He really is abandoning the youngins to their whoopings, you know, because you know the whoopings are coming.
Yeah.
Right? And so part of that is just the context of, you know, now we know about the Republic, we know about the Socratic method, we know, you know, what's about to transpire here. Like we're well aware of how Socrates does what he does. And so this whole framework setup starting point is really important symbolically in allowing us to interface with, recognize, and engage with the argument to come in a way that makes sense, but also, you know, and as you stray into chapter 2, right, also what becomes clear is that there's a setup that's been done, right? That there's and it may not be explicit, right? It may be, oh well, the kids are gonna get caught in this trap of argumentation that's common amongst, we'll say, the rhetorical form of the day, and that's going to not end well for them because Socrates, right?
Yes, nice.
Yeah, I think there is I've seen this myself. There is an element in which the older men, when they get into the more leisurely part of their life, you're right. You're right, Mark. They kind of set up a space, and and there is there is an aspect of messing with it, but I don't think it's a messing in the sense of a kind of cruel messing of like, I just want to throw a wrench in the thing to kind of see it all tumble down. It's more like it's more like what is it like? It's kind of like drawing people's attention to something by virtue of kind of just the draw that you might have as a man of that age, and then kind of running off so that you don't you kind of allow them to explore it and and kind of figure it out for themselves.
Right. Well, that interaction is the interaction with the creation of curiosity. Oh, there's these old men just blathering about, and they say something really interesting, and you're like, well, they were just having this kind of banal conversation. Oh, what's it like to be old? Now that you're old,
Yeah.
what's going on? How does that? What? Tell me about it. And he's well, this and that. Oh, tell me about wealth. How does wealth like? You think money's just good? Like, what's up with that, right? So they're drawing their curiosity in, right? It is a moving of attention, right? It's time, energy, and attention, and so it's a moving of attention. And then what's happening is sort of withdrawing and making a space for the old guys not to just go, oh yeah, of course. Of course that's how wealth, of course that's what justice is. Of course that's not the totality of course you can't reduce justice. They don't want that because
Yeah.
they're not, to your point, Adam, they're not setting them up to knock them down, really. They're setting them up for proper education, right? Not training. They're not training them. There's an element of training, but they're educating them by grabbing their curiosity, inflaming their passions, because that happens, right at the end of chapter 2, that's happened, right? And then putting them in a situation where they're drawn into this, they're sort of like drawn into this hole that's much deeper than they suspect, right? And by way of curiosity. And that's what engenders the education.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to realize that there's an archetype there that's embodied, right? Like it's like the wise old king or something. It's like, oh, there's the next generation, and I'm gonna put them on a quest, right? I'm gonna put them in a place where they will have to fend for themselves so that they can find out who they are and become something more. And yeah, I think we might need more of that in our lives. And I also figured back, like, I think there's going to be a recurring pattern of trees, sets of tree, because I think there's 3 types of cities, right? But there was also three types of wealth that were accentuated, or types was maybe not the right word, but like his granddad, right, was the guy who made a fortune effectively, right? Then his dad was the guy who tanked it, and then he was the guy in the middle, right? So there's an element of humility that he puts in there, but there's also like, I'm not incompetent. So it's interesting to maybe see how these trees keep popping up and the way in which they're used.
Maybe
Oh, that's good.
governments examples
I
are
like
given
that.
later.
Yeah, I like that catch. I didn't catch the 3s in the beginning, so that was useful. And also, like right at the end here of chapter 1, right? Your part then will fall to me as your heir,
Yeah.
right? And then it's like, by all means, and a big smile, right? And you can just see it in your head, right? And it's like,
He's giving a wink and a nod,
Exactly. And with that, I'm out of here. But off to the barbecue, off to the food, right? So and so you get that sense of passing down the baton, the knowledge, right? Passing down the interaction, right? Because this whole idea of inheritance is right there in that final. You're not just inheriting the money, because that's what's discussed earlier, is the inheritance. Like, I want to leave my sons at least as much as I was left, right? That very much, that goes back to Manuel's excellent point.
And
about,
it's also in the horse races actually before that, the handing off in the...
Oh yeah, the
Yeah,
goddess,
there's
the festival.
all the symbolic theme about handing off the fire at night and on horseback, which sounds interesting indeed. Wow, what an interesting thing. Why would it be interesting to have stuff handed down to you, right? And I mean, I suspect later we'll probably touch on the whole idea of what the king's supposed to relinquish to his son, because that's probably going to come up, because that's very much what's hinted at when you talk about handing down. And so you can see, hopefully, or sense maybe, or intuit all of the rich symbolism in the setup. It's very subtle in some points, and it's really stark in others, but it's in some sense, because there's subtlety going on, with all this background knowledge of understanding that, the city is unique, right? Because there's no separation between, we'll say, the margins and the center, right? Which is very, very sort of ultra democratic Athens sort of style, right? Athenian sort of style. And then there's also this sense that things are flowing from the religious tradition out, right? Out of that. And then there's this sense of that being the thing that exemplifies through the passing of the torches, this whole idea that is culturally, super important, of handing down and handing off. And they start with wealth. It's like, but I'm not really just handing off my wealth. I'm also handing off my arguments, my rationality, in some sense.
Well, actually, they go back into that a little bit later, right? So it's like what are you giving me for my arguments? And then Socrates says, I give you praise, right?
So
I cheer you on.
Consider the difference in imagery between a torch in a house, or a torch still, or a torch on a lamppost, and a torch on running horses.
Yeah, you're creating a trail of light through the darkness, because it's running horses at night. But that's explicit. It's at night, and so that creates a different imagery entirely.
And then it's a difference between, if you're thinking about the torch as the thing being gifted, it's the thing being gifted experiencing the effect of time and the environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and time's a big theme, right? Time's a big theme, because it starts with the old men talking, right? And it starts with this ancient ritual sort of engagement, even though the ritual itself may be new. The idea of celebration and ritual engagement's not.
It's vulnerable. Like a torch on horseback, you drop that, it's over. Yeah. So
there's the movement there.
Yeah, and the thunder of it, the noise of it, it's loud. I don't know, it just strikes me intense visuals.
Yeah, the thing that I was thinking about is that it leaves an after image, right? Because it's a moving light. So there's this thing that remains where it's no longer there. So you're interfacing with an image, which goes into the theory of forms later on, right? With the image being the least real.
Well, I really looked at it as overlapping what he said about wealth too, because his grandfather had a brilliance represented by this money, and then it was lost, and then it was regained, and that's like torches moving through air. There's going to be a waning and a recurrence, and just all of that, and it could just went out. It could have just went out with Socrates. He could have just continued to dwindle like his dad, and sometimes that happens. So it's just so when I read these kind of things, I become more aware. I had this with Marcus Aurelius too. I become more aware of the attention to the blossoming of life that the ancients were just better at. It just seems like they were better at it. Oh, be aware, it blossoms for a time. And I see that in these torches as it's a continued maintenance. And the reason I think that's important is the same reason I think people should plant stuff, is humans' interaction with nature and maintenance of nature is more important than what we build. Like, I mean, what we build is part of that. Like, it's part of nature. And it's like, just because something will decay doesn't mean you shouldn't build it. And it's being part of that whole participation pattern. Anyway.
Yeah, the handing off theme is everywhere. But again, I think it's part of the framing. It's part of the important part of the framing. Right? It's not just some ancillary, arbitrary setup that could be replaced with something else. That they are setting up this thread through time, right, and exemplifying that thread through time by carrying it in a certain order and talking about it symbolically through the torches on horseback at night. And that theme is woven in symbolically through the whole chapter. And again, it may seem like this banal sort of random setup that doesn't matter to the argument, but in fact, the whole idea of having this discussion is completely constrained by, contained within, and driven by this framing. It doesn't actually, if you take out this first chapter, this framing, and start with chapter 2, the motivations don't work anymore. It's not some objective material reality that you can just arbitrarily jump into. It really requires the engagement with the first chapter and the careful consideration of these, seemingly minor interactions with the fact that there's no wall, right? You can get right down to the area of trade. This is a foreign celebration, but it is a religious celebration, right? The conversation between the old men, it's kind of fluffy, and then it's not. Now it's a very deep trap that they've set for these poor little poor little empty minds that are about to be filled or overfilled with knowledge and rationality.
Is it
and so go ahead.
okay? Is it an ominous, how we say it in English? Ominous image, ominous scenery, because it seems like the characters are in fear a little bit Socrates, because he's really good at debating, and afterwards you feel this fear with Taramiscus. Yes, he jumped at Socrates and he say, "You must be, you must tell us the truth. You must be straight. Stop asking questions." It seems like characters are fear with conversing with Socrates, and maybe this image is something scary setup because Socrates is coming. Maybe, I don't know.
So this is one of the things I loved most, like the detail of the non-abridged version. Manuel mentioned, oh, Socrates pays and prays, but like the way and the detail of like Socrates has got a backbone. Like when Thrasymachus, and like it's like one of the most badass Western quotes I've ever heard. When Thrasymachus, I have it. I think I could have it here. They're putting pressure. Thrasymachus is saying, "Behold," he said, "the wisdom of Socrates. He refuses to teach himself and goes about learning to others, of others to whom he never even says thank you." And then Socrates says, "That I learn of others," I replied, "is quite true, but that I am grateful, I wholly deny. Money I have none, and therefore I pay in praise, which is all I have. And how ready I am to pay to praise any one of you who appears to me to speak well of you. To speak well. To speak well, you will very soon find out when you answer For I expect that you will answer well. Sorry, I messed up that reading. But basically, he's saying like, I expect you to talk back to me. Like he's getting put under pressure by all these people, and like he's able to it's just, I love the way he does it. I'm sorry, I just found that so cool.
I agree.
I botched the reading there, but
Well, and that goes back to the money and the attachment of the money to the value and that interaction, right? Because again, there's a setup there for a reason, and I get the feeling that every single component and aspect of that setup and all the symbolism in it is going to get wrapped up in the book later on, because I haven't read it yet, so I'm reading it right along with the first time here, right? So I think that's what's important, is like, well, what's valuable? Is money valuable? And Socrates would say, of course, no. He'd also say knowledge isn't valuable. I agree on both accounts. All right. And then that's what's important, is that he is like, the setup of this is not done by Socrates, right? He's a character inside this frame, right? Inside this container. And that's why they talk about money at first, and then they take that principle, apply it to justice, right, and dump everybody in the justice bucket without their permission, effectively, or their understanding. They have no idea what's happening. And you do have to imagine too, like everyone knows who Socrates is. He's the troublemaker. We all know this already, right? And that's why the passions get inflamed at the end of chapter 2, right? Like, what are you doing? Why aren't you why aren't you just answering the stupid question? Why are you playing the stupid game like you always do? Because it's like you always do this. Why are you doing this to us? We're well familiar with your nasty little tricks, right? And I don't want to jump ahead too much because there's a lot in chapter 2 we could discuss too if we want to go there. But yeah, I mean, there is that sense that everybody knows this guy. They know they're familiar with his ways. He's at least got a reputation that precedes him, and they're sort of used to this, even though they fell for it again, right? They're sort of used to this, or at least hearing that this is what happens when you're around this troublemaker.
Yeah, no,
sorry. Is chapter 1 book 1, or is chapter 1 half
Yes,
book 1?
yes, exactly. That's the question I was
No,
asking.
we have 4 chapters, so I think it's the 4 characters, right? So you have in
okay.
book 1.
There's only dialogue with 2 people really in book 1, which is Cephalus and Thrasymachus.
No.
So
There is more, but there is 2 others, I think.
Yeah, no, it gets divided out, right? Because Polemarchus is chapter 2. So every time they introduce a character, they're dividing it into a chapter. In this particular,
Oh, yeah,
version
you're right.
here.
There's a little section in the middle with Polemarchus, but I'm okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, but it does
Oh.
end with Thrasymachus. Yeah, I was gonna just to add what you said, Mark. Most people like, today would have already finished with book 1. Like they would have just like, all right, let's get to the philosophy. But book 1 is tremendously important, very important.
So
Yeah, well, and even like I said, the thing I was resistant at first to this chapter thing. I'm like, there's no chapters. Like, what are you guys talking about? And now I'm like, oh no, because in play, if you want to talk about plays, and I don't know that much about plays, I'm pretending to be an expert, but there are things that I have heard from people who do know about plays, right? One of them is that there's no non-characters in a play. Right? And so the setup of the play, the fact that it takes place in a house, for example, or at somebody's house for a barbecue, is a character in the play. Right? So plays are all characters. There's no non-characters. There's no NPCs. There's no non-character players in a play. A play is all about that. And so the chapter 1 is not like the character of was it Cephalus or whatever, right? It's actually the setup. And then really chapter 2 is the introduction of the first character as we would see them, even though the quote, the other characters or the main character in Socrates has already been introduced. So if you think of it as a play, it's like, oh, because there's all sorts of different literary tricks that they use when they're writing a play as opposed to a regular book or a story, right, which is different, or a myth, right? They all have different forms that they take. And so when you think of this as taking the form of a modern play, and maybe it's an ancient play, again, I'm not a play expert or anything, but it's like, oh, okay, so there's a character here in 1, which is the character of the setup of what's going to unfold, right? It's the container into which everything gets drawn, right, and placed. And then it's like, oh, I can see the chapters. I'm like, of course there's chapters here. It's a play.
So this chapter 2 is after they arrive at the house and his conversation with Cephalus, right? For chapter 1 was the very beginning after
chapter 2
Chapter
is at
1
the end of the Thrasymachus discussion about justice being the advantage of the stronger. It's when they conclude that discussion.
Does somebody have can you write down here where the ends of each chapter is? There should be a little.
Adam has a PDF for you.
The end of chapter 1 is the handoff from Cephalus, right, to Polemarchus.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
That's the end of chapter 1, and then the end of chapter 2 is basically when what's his name gets all upset, right?
Thrasymachus?
Thrasymachus gets
Thrasymachus.
all upset.
That's chapter 250. My audiobook's got 10 chapters. I listened to chapter 1 like 3 or 4 times probably. Am I really
There's-
off on this? Thrasymachus is in
There's
chapter
really
2?
10.
Oh, 'cause
10
that's all the-
books.
Really? I must have messed up. My
Yes,
bad.
me too. I've read the first book. It means like because so the first book is 4 chapters, as you said. I think I've read all the 4. So the first chapter is only the setup. In a way. It's not really going into deep discussion.
Yeah, the argument doesn't start until chapter 2.
Okay.
Everything else is kind of set up, and then the argument starts when he hands it down to his son to take over and have his fun or have his interaction with Socrates, and that interaction is what causes the dust up with Thrasymachus there, right?
Yeah, and yeah.
There's also
And
little markers here. Most things should have. It'll say like 331 A B C D.
Yeah,
E,
those are
333.
manuscript markers.
Right, exactly. Those should be universal for every translation.
Yeah, that's
So-
up to. So
Yeah, this so 336 is where the chapter 3 starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my book, the end of book 1 for me, it takes roughly 44 pages, and it's at the end of the Thrasymachus stuff, which that's about 1/10 of the book. So an audiobook, 10 chapters, each 1 hour. That's what I've got here. The end of the Thrasymachus stuff on the end of book 1. Is that different from you guys? It sounds like it's different.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For me, it's the
might
same.
be the same. Right?
For
I
me,
think-
the same, but I think it's different from.
Okay.
So what do we do?
Did we want to proceed with
Oh.
Polemarchus? So Polemarchus is Cephalus' son, and he goes to the next justice idea. Do we want to proceed that way, Manuel? What do you think?
Yeah, no, like we can go on. Like I'm so
Yeah,
good.
that's fine.
Okay.
Why don't we at least cover that? Yeah.
Okay.
Are you guys going to get into Thrasymachus today or next week?
Should we
I think
pause
why
on
don't we,
that for
why don't
time?
we leave that for next week?
Yeah.
'Cause I haven't
Okay.
read that.
Yeah,
yet.
that'll give me some time to read it again.
Because that's
So
the good
there's-
stuff too. So
Yeah.
that's where the beatdown happens.
It's the argument with the postmodernists, so that's very seriously.
well, so I want to catch on to this idea, right? Like that there's this adversarial thing or whatever. There's this thing of being scared, but like I'd like to reframe it differently, right? Like these people, they come into the conversation and they have their strength, right? So what they're doing is they're establishing their arena. So say, like Socrates, like you can play in my play yard. Like I'm not gonna play your game. You're gonna have to come and drag me out of my game, and because I know my game, and like you can't beat me at my game. That's effectively what I feel that is happening. And I to go back to these 3 personalities, right? Like they're starting from different principles, right? And like the way that I framed it for Danny is I think they're like some sort of evolutionary pressures, right? So if you have your gut, right, like your emotions, right, like your basic emotions, they're gonna train systems in a specific way, right? So if you have an embodied entity that can stress test the system from the passions perspective, right, and then the heart is more related to the social realm, right, like to the social relations, living up to things, and you have to stress test on that level as well for a system to be functional, and the headiness is more on the ideal, right, on the abstraction side of the equation, and every system that is functional also needs to be able to resist that. And I was playing with Danny around. It was like, yeah, like maybe that is correct, right? Like maybe that is actually the 3 frames that you need to impose upon something in order to see if it will hold, like if it is actually true. And like if you can't have these frames go here, or if you can't account for all of them, then you have something seriously lacking, right? Like so one of the things that I want to find out is like, okay, like what is Socrates actually doing, right? Like, because he's obviously privileging a certain contextual framing in order to make his argument, or let his argument make itself, right? And is he correct in the way that he's approaching that? Like, or like what is the reason that he's choosing the angle that he's taking on these things?
Can you summarize real quick, Manuel, the three frames that you're outlining for determining, say, truth, good, and beautiful?
Yeah, right. So one is the passions, right? So when there's a society, like there's people that aren't emotionally developed, right? And like they're basically children. Right? They're gonna put the drugs in their arm if they get drugs. They're gonna drink every evening if they can do
Okay.
that, right? So
Yeah.
that's the level of people that is going to manifest themselves in society, and you need to account for that. And then you have the people who are drawn by charisma, by courage, right? Like there's this social uh, dimension. And that's the life in society, right? Like it's the communion effectively. It's the emergence in another way, and that's living in the spirit, I guess, the best way to describe that. And then there's this intellectual class, right? Like there's the bureaucracy, which is trying to do discernment towards the future, right? Like up, but also out into the world, and also
Would that just
back
be
in.
control? Would that just be control and certainty? So the bureaucracy, control and certainty.
Yeah, well, it would be and I think he actually goes into this later in the Republic as well, right? It would be the regulatory, right? So that
Yeah.
having these three aspects, right? Like they need to have a place, right? Because they have a function, right? Like they're necessary in some way, and so you need to have a system where they can commune, where they can come together, right? And like if you don't have a system that can hold these three at the same time, then you're gonna have a problem, right? Like now you're out of balance.
Does it map onto
Yeah, I mean, I can.
heaven, earth, mediation in the middle, nous, amos,
Yeah,
and then
I'm
appetites? You the
Well,
appetite.
you can loosely map it like that, but it's not a direct map.
Yeah, that was my problem. I can't map it to the three frames, right? I can map two of them, and then it's like I
Well,
get to intellectual. I'm like,
if you
can't do
if
it.
you think about it, if you look at the soul, like you have the appetites, or if we're going to look at the polis, the equivalent would be the people driving the trucks and building the roads and um, doing the manual labor, and you have the people at the top, which are embodying the ideal, or the first point of contact to the ideal, and then you have the middle, which integrates the two.
Yeah, but no, I don't think I don't think it's integrating. Like I actually think they're
Right.
separate.
Well, yeah, I think this is the problem. If you wanted to make a distinction here, and I think you can, I think it's fair to say that there are only three main human draws, right? Passion, charisma, and intellect. And all of a sudden that you can fit a lot of behavior in a nice simple model like that.
So why did I go there?
So just to kind of,
Oh yeah,
I can explain why I resonated with what Manuel was saying. Is this idea of like passion, intellect, and what was the other one? What did you say?
Charisma.
Charisma. So thinking about those factors, like as the argument proceeds, like constantly think as it fractures out, right? Thinking about that with respect to whatever frame you're in. That's something that's kind of new to me, I guess. Like typically I get stuck in one of those things. And so when I learned this from Manuel this morning, I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I'm going to have to start applying that more and see what happens." So anyway, that's why I found interesting about that. So for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's really cool, but the question is it correct, right? Like, how do you even figure out whether it's correct or not?
Right. Yeah, at some point you have to just employ the pragmatism, and I think it's good, right? It's so once you have the larger frame, figuring out how the actors are acting within the passions, the charisma, and the intellect, which one they're holding up in the moment, can tell you a lot about how they're going to behave within that larger frame, right? And then figuring out where their attention is, right, gets us back to the 3 frames, the stuff I have on navigating patterns, right, which is you with yourself, you with nature, and you with others, right? It's like, okay, so because the interaction of those things tells you a huge amount about what's going on around.
Yeah, and like that. Right now you have 9 boxes, right? They 3 by 3, and I think you probably can set on another tree on that, and then you can appeal to almost anything universally, like that.
Well, you can locate something. I don't know that you can appeal to it. You can locate it within a frame, probably with just the 6, but maybe it takes 9. It doesn't matter to some extent.
3 by 3 is 9.
Oh,
But
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But yeah, but the point is not to science it, right? But the point is to develop the intuitive understanding of that it's a valid category that you can have a relationship with, and
Yeah.
then you can just like when you sense it, you know where you're at, right? Like it's like grounding you in your relationship to the other person because you know what they're doing.
The thing that Manuel said that clicked with me was it's reciprocity that has to be trained. It's to gain proficiency where I don't have proficiency. To understand like which of those things the other person is in, like that's what I found useful from what what I learned from Manuel this morning is that's a skill that you could work on, right? That's kind of what I learned. So
Yeah, and so to go back to this idea of an intention, right? Like I've had many group conversations where I'm like trying to figure out like where someone's eyes at and like what are they looking at, right? Like just be with the other person and be with the way that they're attending to the world, right? And like you can learn 2 things, right? Either I should be doing that as well, or like they're doing something horribly wrong and this is what's wrong with what they're doing, right? And either of those is really useful, right? Because it develops a way to self-reflect as well, right? Because like
Right.
you're letting loose of the objects, right? And you're starting to participate in the relationship, right? Like that people have or that you're having, and that opens a new way of being.
Yeah, it gives you that sense of, when is it, what is the point at which I should be self-critical, right? And what is the point at which I should stand my. And that's really valuable to people because that's where they get caught up, right? Because they can always go, well, you shouldn't be standing your ground anymore. You should, give up to the other person. And it's like, really? Is that what I should be doing? Because I don't think so, right?
So to go back to the text a little bit, so there's this piece in 33.2, I think. The physician administers the appropriate diet, remedies to the body, and then the cook cannot be described in the same way, right? And like I think he's going into trees there as well.
Right.
So do we have any opinion about what's happening there?
do you mind if I just go through the notes to set the context?
Sure.
So the Polymarchus' definition of justice is that justice is doing good to friends and evil to enemies, and the refutation of that is that the just man never does evil even to his friends. When something inflicts harm on a horse, the horse deteriorates in the excellence of a horse. Similarly, to injure a man is to deteriorate his excellence, which is justice. That's what Socrates says. To at least to refute this argument. A horse, by his art, cannot injure a horse, nor can a musician by his art make men unmusical. Similarly, a just man by justice cannot make another man unjust. Thus, only unjust men injure other men. To do evil is never just. So that's kind of my interpretation of the Polemarchus argument on justice. Now, I found the idea of the art, like so he introduces the art and the excellence words here. So that's kind of just one I wanted to frame. Manuel.
Well, it's not. Polemarchus starts with Simonides' argument. He doesn't make his own, right?
Okay.
And I think that that's important too, because it's explicit that he's a poet, and poetry is especially repugnant to Plato, and so we have to keep all that in mind, because again, it's all setup. There's a bunch of setup going on. It's very subtle, and people gloss over it. They're like, "Oh, he's a poet. Who cares? Like, whatever. Like, doesn't he could be a sci-fi writer? No, it's very important that he's a poet, right? All of these. It's that whole thing about in a play. If you put a gun on the wall, right, you better use it by the end of the act or something, right? There's all this. So there are no details in this, because it's a very concise text. There's no detail here that's worth skipping over. Like, it's all super significant. Maybe not in the moment, but it is super significant to the overall unfolding of the story. So the fact that he's kind of a poet, and it's already admitted sort of up front, well, who can really know what poets mean when they talk? Because we're kind of interpreting them anyway. So it's kind of like, I think I get what he means because he's a poet. But he's a poet, so it's okay to have that loosey-goosey attitude, because that's actually really important to what Socrates does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that stood out there to me is that they used the word evil, and then in another translation they used harm, and I'm like, why are you putting evil there? Like, it's especially in relation to justice. You can't have evil before justice. Like,
Yeah, it's harm. It's not evil. That's for sure.
What is difficult with, I think, with reading this is the definition he set up for his terms. The perspective of Socrates at the time was different from us regarding the definition of the words. When, for example, he says justice, there is two sides of it. There is the state management side, and there is the individual virtue. And he jumped on the different notion without saying to us, he speak about state management, or he speak about individual virtue. And it's the same thing for injustice, the just man. Like, sometimes I had to think about what really he's talk about. Is there like a sub-definition of his term?
I don't think he's making the distinction. I think he's actually, the whole book is him saying that those are the same thing.
Yes, because the perspective is like, for example, at the time, beauty is a virtue. For us right now, it's not a virtue. Like, beauty is like, you are born with it, and you look good, that's okay, or great art, but it's not a virtue in itself. Virtue for us is being humble or giving back something. But for them, just being beautiful is a virtue. That's how they think of it.
So this is one of the things that slapped me in the face that I thought was really cool about the book, in that I was pulled out of mechanistic thinking, kind of like how we were talking about money. Like, is money good in and of itself? Well, by whom, for whom are you good? The context matters. In the same way with justice. Oh my God, what was I going to say? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Oh, basically the category bending. Yeah, like you said, the two aspects of justice. So the way that Socrates is able to bend categories, it forces my attention on the relationships of everything, right? So I have to look at this whole integrated system now, right?
Yeah.
And it's like everything's dependent on everything. And if I change one thing, I have to refactor the whole system. So I found that to be like fascinating, just personally.
So I would say that maybe that's always true, right? But you're just not thinking that way, because
Well-
that's the thing that I found out. Like all of these people, and this is the scientific mindset. It's like, oh, we're just gonna cut. But it's like, no, their whole things, they're always talking about the same thing. We're just not relating to the sameness. We're just relating to the distinction.
Well, yeah. So at the core of the problem of categorization, that's why I like the introduction of the concept of the art and the excellence in the end. The end of the eye is sight, right? It's like you need those things. You need those things. Otherwise, what are you going to build on? So right when Wiesem says today, we say virtue and we say justice, and we are not speaking the same language, right? Because we're missing something, right? So this was kind of the first thing that sort of slapped me in the face and be like, ooh, this is interesting. I wonder. This is why I wanted to talk it out. So
Well, that I would argue that's the materialism, right? And the science comes in and says, well, we know how to deal with materialism because we're science. What you do is you divide things up into these categories. Categories are self-evident. It's like, whoa, wait, what? Right. And to Manuel's point, they're not. That's not true, right? And had they engaged with Socrates, they'd know that. Because Socrates, the place where the Socratic method works the best is to show you that science is complete garbage and cannot explain the most important parts of the world, which are truth, good, and beauty. And right to the earlier point, like we don't have a sense not of the virtues, right? So not merely of beauty and truth and goodness. We don't have a sense of the concept of virtue that would allow us to engage with true, the good, the beautiful, right? Because I had this conversation on my live stream last night, right? Like, what do you mean by being is good? How are you justifying that rationally? And I was like, no, dude, I'm not justifying it rationally. I'm taking rationality, I'm shooting it in the head, I'm digging 6 feet down, burying it, and pissing on its grave. Okay, that's what I'm doing to rationality. And I'm telling you that I'm starting from the point of being is good. And then maybe we can talk about rationality. But I'm not trying to rationalize something like being is good, right? I'm not trying to rationalize what is true, the good, and the beautiful. There's no rationality that can be applied. They're not able to be put into scientific categories. And we don't have a sense for virtues are the things that are immune to science.
First principle, because it can't be reduced past that.
The goal of Socrates is not to be just in a way. It's not the purpose of the first book. The purpose is to be happy. I would say, like the goal is the happiness, and I think when he talk about justice, like in the state management, is more about how do we rule properly, and then for people is how we become more happy. Is it advantageous to be just or just? And so the goal we fix in an implicit way is happiness, and he doesn't debate this. Like this is the ultimate purpose here. I think how I perceive it. So other philosophers may think differently. May think, well, you have to separate what is just and what make me happy, and set up different priorities. Like maybe I need to act just before and then make myself happy. But in Socrates, he just set up. His goal is to be happy, and then he found in a way that being just is you have more chance to be happy.
Yeah, I don't know what definition of happy you're using, but I think already in the first chapter we went over this, right? Like he was saying, well, like does being a good man, right? A good old man with money and like a good man without money, right? And there was this element where there's a detachment of the good from the pleasure or whatever, right? But there's also a reference to the peace of the soul, right? And so if you wanna conflate happiness with peace of the soul, but like I wouldn't call peace of the soul happiness. I would call that something else. And in order to get proper peace of the soul, like if you look at Stoicism, right, like you need to let go of a bunch of things, which is not a pleasant experience. So there's a bunch of sacrifice, which is obviously implicit in the ancient thing, right? Like sacrifice is normal, but yeah, happiness is not a modern version of happiness, at least.
The happiness doesn't come into the book until very late. It's page 39 in this PDF.
Well, they get into it in the Thrasymachus stuff too. When they
Yes,
say
yes.
the unjust men lead by obligation, the unjust man, Thrasymachus makes the argument that the unjust man is happier than the just man when he makes a case that the just man is miserable. And therefore injustice is more advantageous than justice. And Socrates does dismantle that, but this I think that idea flows into the idea of like the categorization problem is a mathematician when you're making a math error, right? So the thought leads into that. Another like it, I think it leads into like the problem of how we categorize things again.
There is two arguments. There is the remorse part at the beginning, like the unjust man feel dissensation, remorse, and then he speak about the soul, the example of the soul, and he say how what is the quality of the soul, and then therefore if we don't act according to our soul, we begin to be unhappy. An argument like this. So there is two arguments, the remorse and the soul. That's how I saw it. And so you're making a statement about being just, and being just is more advantageous than being unjust. So I think it's more like a happiness argument. It's not desire, it's happiness.
Yeah, I would maybe call that joy, right? Like,
yeah, I don't buy that. Happiness is a very modern idea, like extremely modern. Like the ancients didn't have any conception of happiness to recognize. Yes, when I say happiness, it's not desire. It's being fulfilled. It's being accomplished. It's I would say it's a bigger version of happiness.
Mm-hmm. So the distinction that I make between joy and happiness is happiness is an egoic thing, right? So it's eros, right? It's a fulfillment of eros. That's when you're happy. Like, oh, I got my present. That makes me happy, right? While enjoyment is a consequence of you witnessing your participation in a bigger body, right? So if you're part of a community or part of a company that finishes a big project, right, and you can have a sense of pride in your role, in your contribution, in like you can share the honor that is bestowed by the manifestation of what happened, and like that's enjoyment. And I think enjoyment is the proper way of being emotionally fulfilled in some sense.
Well, this is actually really important. So I just did a bunch of quick research, very quick research, right? So I've got this book, which Ethan generously sent to me for Christmas because he's the best person ever, and I've got this PDF, and in the PDF they've got commentary. Okay, in the commentary, happy, 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 happy. It's all a modern person talking about happy. Okay, it's not in the book. Not in the book. If you contrast this with this translation, actually, the translation talks about it differently in the PDF, entirely differently. So in the PDF, it's so that they minister solely to their master's advantage and happiness, and not in the least degree to their own. Okay, that's very important wording. In this book, that's not what it says at all. It says to their master's happiness at their expense.
Okay.
Right. So
Right.
that's a denigration of happiness, as it's very clear. It's very clear in the Alan
Where's it
Bloom
at?
translation. The happiness is not not the important part. And this, again, this is relatively far in the book. This is roughly this chapter 3, right? It's the third character that comes in.
Yeah.
So yes,
I
what
want to
is the
say that it reinforces my thing, right? Because this is the abdomen, right? Like the passions, right? And so, what is the passion seeking? The passion is seeking happiness, right? So that's one of the 3 frames. And I think if you're in the perspective of the passions, happiness is the highest value.
Yeah.
um,
It could
um,
also be experience or pleasure or
Yeah, those all lead to happiness, right? And that's a red flag. Ooh, why is the ego the highest thing?
well, you can have passion with injustice.
what?
You can have passion, desire. You can fulfill your desire with being unjust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right,
I
that's the
I wasn't
problem.
making a justice claim. I was making a value claim.
Right. The problem is, if happiness is your value, you can't be just. The justice
Yep.
is right off the table immediately.
Yes, but what is exactly the goal then? How you see it? What is the goal of being just? Like, what is
So
advantages and disadvantages to being just? Because I'm a bit
Right.
at the end of the book, at the end of first book. Maybe this is not the question to ask now right now, but
No, I think
just
it is the question to ask right now, and I think there's been a great deal of debate over this, and maybe Ethan will correct me if I get this, but I think what my buddy Jack said, and he's got a PhD in this sort of stuff. I think what he said in his series is that there's a great deal of confusion over what the goal of engaging in things like justice and the virtues really is, and that the modern people, and I think Jack is actually, like me, not a fan of the modern sort of interpretations, is something like happiness. But that's actually not the way the ancient Greeks would have thought of it. And if you think about it for 4 seconds, you realize why. It's like, well, happy when? Happy now or happy later? Because those two things are in conflict all by yourself. You don't need to get into, are the slaves making the master happy? Right? Is the master obligated to make the slaves happy? And right, it gets into these difficult, or I would argue impossible situations, right? And so it's worth asking, well, what is the goal here? And I think actually in the setup, they do kind of address this. They address this in that it's a play, right? It's a play with characters, and the first set of characters is the setting of the book, right? And so the way that they're actually playing this out and talking about it is as something coming down from above and through the ages via the old people. And so the value of justice is expressed through the emergence from the old men. And that's also, again, how they draw them in to this conversation, right? Is they have this sort of banal, high level conversation about something that, they're like, wait a minute, you guys are just talking about things like wealth and how it should work, as though, you're leaving out all the detail, right? Leaving out all the good stuff. How did you get there? Where's the rationality? Explain yourself, sir. Explain yourself, right? And then they shift it into justice, right? From money, and show that the principle of money can't be used on the principle, can't be used as a principle to apply to justice. And so the ethos of what they're doing, and this is an ethos we maybe don't understand, is pure exploration. it doesn't have a specific aim in the moment because they're exploring a virtue. And you can't aim at a virtue and explore the virtue, because if you've already aimed at it, you've set your course in some sense. You're already oriented a certain direction. And that is the Socratic trick, is to say, oh, you think you know justice, huh? All right, well, where'd you get that from? Right? And it's just the why. It's the 3-year-old why question over and over again. Socrates just does it a little bit better, right? Because that's his ethos. So our ethos would be, well, why are we discussing this, right? But I don't think the ancient Greeks had that. I think they had that more playful, if you want to call it serious play, right, or the more playful attitude towards exploration of something they took for granted as important, which is a virtue. In this case, the virtue of justice. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I think so, and it's helpful as well to see like where do you even get the word virtue from, because people might use it kind of, oh, virtue is kind of doing good or something like that. But as far as I'm aware, the Greek use of the word virtue is something like arete, so it's like peak, right? So you're looking to that highest thing, and you don't need to justify that the highest thing is there, because that's just the mountain, right? That's the Greeks. Where did all the Greek gods live? Mount Olympus, which was one of the tallest mountains they could see at the time, I think. And so that's something to look at as well. So they didn't have to justify justice as being something that was needed to have any other place. It existed, and then it's just kind of, let's play around that. Let's see, well, what if we play around with, well, how does money relate to it?
This is why I like.
Yeah.
Sorry, were you done? Sorry.
No, go ahead, Danny. Yeah.
This is why I like the thinking along the lines of the monster, the beast, and the man, is because you can just ask this why question to anything. Like, okay, let's take Polymarchus. Justice is doing good to friends, evil to enemies. Well, what do you mean by good? How do you know you're doing good? Well, how do you know your friends are your friends? What do you mean by harm? What do you mean by enemies? Or if you go to Thrasymachus, justice is to the advantage of the stronger. Like, well, are all rulers infallible? How do they know what their interests are? What if their interests are not what they think they are? What if you're annoyed at your boss, and then it's actually you need that in order to sharpen yourself? Like, so that you could take, it's like, how do we know? How do you know yourself? Like, all this complication, and so that's kind of what I mean. Why when I say I'm like blown out, you get like. And Socrates does it with like 2-3 sentences, right? He's so efficient that he can just quickly like push, and blow you out to like boom. Yeah, like you've got to zoom out and look, be more periscopic. So
right, and that is his trick in some sense. But I think what we're actually trying to get at is that, so when you say, well, what's the telos, or what's the goal of the discussion of the Republic, I think the way the Greeks view it is that virtues exist independent of relationships to other things.
Okay.
And therefore, the virtue of justice is worth discussion, irrespective of happiness, irrespective of righteousness, irrespective of respect for the gods, right? It doesn't make any sense to put it in relation to something, even though right in this PDF, he does it right in the beginning. He frames everything in terms of happiness. Well, that's not in the book, dude. Like, it's clearly not in the book. I mean, it's clearly a mistake. And I hate to sit there and say, well, look, this guy who knows all this Greek, which I've never read, is wrong. But this is clearly a modern projection.
Not a relative
if I
thing.
may, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I just said what they're doing is they're showing that justice or virtue, it's not a relative thing. It's not in relative to one thing or another. And they really get into this with Thrasymachus later. It's a external thing, if you will, an objective thing, not a physical objective thing.
It is a quality of a connection. That's a relationship. Mm-hmm. So there you can look at like there's an object, right? And then there's the subject that is subjecting the object, right? So there's a quality or a directionality of a relationship, right? And then there's the relationship itself, right? Yeah. And the relationship of itself has certain aspects, right? Like so one of them is justice, right? Like another one is I don't know, like humility, right? Which would go to like, okay, like the subject. How does the subject look towards the object? Well, if it doesn't know itself properly, like how can it be in proper relationship to what it's objecting to it, right? So there's all of these things, and in order to be in right relationship, right, or to have the true nature of your relationship, you have to account for all of these aspects, right? And that's why justice is important, right? Like justice, a true understanding of justice allows you to be in right relationship to the world. Like it is a prerequisite, right? And this is why I use the word peace, right? Because what brings right relationship to the world, what brings peace, right? Like it means that you're doing the right thing. You don't have to worry. Like you're always gonna be doing the right thing as a consequence of having the right relationship to what you're doing. And that's what they're going for. Like they're going for a way of resting yourself in something outside of yourself, something that is bigger, that is justifying your behavior, right? Because that's what is all going back to, right? Like it's a justification for your action. Like that's what justice is, right? So it's an authority, and like it's somewhere, and like I need to commune with it in some way, and the only way that I can commune with it is if I can get the sensibility to understand, or at least understand the implications upon me of what it means to be just in the moment.
Yeah.
How I saw it is the independent part of I didn't saw justice as like a independent block. Like for me, it's the how he set up the meaning of function and excellency. Like he give an example of a horse, and the horse his function is to run. That's the function of the horse, and so the function in itself, like to has an independency, because all he need to do good is run. Like doctor has a heart, and he heal people, and the function is healing, and so the function has a form of independence.
No, but
The eyes.
no, but no, that's not completely true. Like you
right.
can do that, but like you cannot participate with that. Like that's the problem. Like you can say, well, oh yeah, like doctor is supposed to heal me, right? Like, but what does that mean? Does it mean that he's gonna do like a laser on my neck, or does it mean he's gonna put some salve, or does he just tell me tough it out, right? Like
no, we talk only about the function of healing. Like the doctor, the doctor, there is the person, the doctor, where he I don't know, he gets a salary, he gets some advantages to be able to have his job, but the function of healing in itself is independent. It's in a way it's
what? No, but no, but like healing as a process might be something, but in order for it to be meaningful to me, healing, it needs to apply to my body, right? And now it is dependent upon me again.
Yes, no, the function of healing. The function of healing is the purpose. The purpose of
the manifestation of healing.
Yes, the manifestation of healing is to heal people. Yes, there is an interaction of people, but this interaction is ingranated in the function in a way. For me, how I read right now the first book, how I saw it is he gave an example of the eye. So the eyes function is to see, and then the optimal thing it can do is its function is to see, and this is how he defined function. And so afterward, he defined the function of the soul, and he said what we need to do, what the soul needs, and what the soul need to deliberate and to comment, deliberate between just and unjust, and comment. So what we need to do, and if we don't accomplish that, we don't accomplish the function of the soul. So the function is independent. It's like it's the own thing, and then the justice is something that we get. It's advantageous to be just because we follow the soul and we have a soul, and so we feel more accomplished. That's why we reach how I saw it. We reach form of plenitude, happiness, whatever you call it, because you respect your, in a way, your soul. You respect the need of your soul because you respect the function of your soul.
Right, but what you're talking about is like an ultimate state, right? And I get this problem when I talk to Christians as well, because like, yes, right, like there's this point where the things that are important to you are the things that should be important to you, and then when you do the things that are important to you, you get a sense of fulfillment and you're doing the right thing. It's like, yes.
No, it's not important to you. It's important to your soul.
Yeah, but that's the same thing. That's the point that you end up at. It's like when you keep focusing on doing the right thing for your soul, the things that are important to you are the right things for your soul at a certain point. Like you will become the person that is an expression of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but that is only after you know what your soul needs, and like there's a whole like tons of steps before that, and you can miscultivate your soul. So that's a little bit the problem that I'm pointing towards.
That's the middle out thinking. That's actually what Socrates destroys. He says, "Oh, you're starting with this poet's definition of justice, are you? Let me show you your error." And that's when he dismantles it. Right? That's why he does it, because he's a poet and there's interpretation and it just happens to be wrong. And that's why he does it. He shows everybody effectively that what they're doing is taking for granted a bunch of things that they're not correct about. Their axioms, their starting points are incorrect. And that's why they're not reaching the understanding of justice. I don't want to say that no justice, because I'm not sure that that's fair, right? But there's got to be an understanding of justice. Their understanding of justice is wrong. Why? Because they're starting in the middle with all these assumptions happen. And what's right and what's soul and what's right. It's like, well, you sure about that? Because here comes Socrates to tell you otherwise.
It's a good question, Wisam. There's the Thrasymachus scene gets really into this. You know, I think that we're for sure going to talk about this next week, and you know, so I think we're kind of jumping ahead. Did we want to kind of go ahead, Adam? I was gonna ask if we wanted to kind of start to wind things down. I don't think we we didn't really even dig into the Polemarchus stuff about the horsemen and the art. But Adam, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say, yeah, no, I see. I only went up to whatever the chapter 1 was in that PDF. So anything kind of past that, if you're talking about Thrasymachus, it's just me following along then in the conversation. So I think I'd be all right with winding things down.
Okay. Did we, Manuel, Mark, did we want to talk a bit on Polemarchus before winding down, or?
I don't. I'm tired.
You good? I'm tired. I'm tired. Everybody good? We want to kind of terminate this here. Sure. Okay.
Well, yeah, no, I want to do a kind of a wind down, right? So like,
let's do a wind down,
I think well, we exemplified a bunch of things, right? And like what the talking is going to be like. Obviously, the topics that are going to be presented are going to sway us in different directions. But I think the spirit was really good. I think exploration was nice. We went in a bunch of different directions, right? Like I hope you guys all kind of got a sense of what it's like to have an intention, and maybe hopefully referenced back to the intention multiple times. And that's also a skill that I hope you guys will be learning over time. So yeah, if anybody wants to reflect a little bit on what happened, like things they found good or not good, right? Like we can now have a moment of reflection on this. So does anybody have some comments on what happened?
Yeah, I didn't saw the religion perspective and the symbolic perspective at the beginning. I was not really sensitive to it. I think it was just a setup. So it was interesting to hear about this and have a different perspective about this. Yes, maybe I will take a look again through this perspective of how is symbolism in the beginning of the book is matter, it's important, and if it wants to show us something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the thing that we always do after a practice, because I consider this a practice, is we take a moment of reflection, right? So we want to reflect on things that are salient within conversation, right? Like they triggered us in a way emotionally or intellectually. And we want to bring these things to mind, and then we want to try and connect these things back to our daily lives, right? So what are the implications of this in my daily life? Is there a way that I can use this to make a change or whatever, or go and figure something out for myself? So the way that we do that is we close our eyes, we point our eyes up, like a little bit up in reverence, and then we take like 30 seconds to let things come to us. To close it off, like I hope next time we'll have more people. We might do it in a live stream format or whatever, that we have an audience interaction. Let's see how people will react to this, and whether there's people that want to participate in this format, because I assume people will, but you never know. Yeah, so thanks everybody for participating. Leave feedback in the comments, so that we get your perspective, and if you want to participate, reach out. I think we'll provide a link to this Discord in the video, and we'll be doing this on Saturday next week. So see y'all. Okay, recording stop.